Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Pollok, Managing Editor of International Rental News Magazine, and I'm joined for this video kind of podcast with Kevin Appleton, who's Chairman of Horizon Platforms, and Ben Hirst, who's the founder and CEO of Horizon. Thanks for joining me, gents. And the reason for our discussion is because Horizon has just announced that it's going to move into a different form of ownership, employee ownership, an employee trust. So that's what I want to talk to you about, also about the direction of the company going forward. But first, maybe, Ben, you could just give us a quick summary of the history of the company.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Murray, and appreciate your time today. So yeah, Horizon Platforms is a powered access rental specialist based in the north of England, formed back in 2008 by myself. So we're in our 14th year of trading now. To give you some idea of the scale today, our turnover is just under 14 million, which is split 60-40 in favour of cross-hired revenue. We're carrying a fleet of roughly 850 units and probably 75 full and part-time members of staff within the team. The kind of customers that we're trading with are those who prioritise service over price, typically requiring a fast responsive service for shorter term hires, and typically work indoors, and so therefore our fleet of access platforms reflects that. So we run purely battery and by energy equipment within the fleet. In terms of how we've got to this point, the business was formed from very small beginnings, but with a real focus on customer service from the off, and yeah, we've like most small businesses hit various different growing pains along the way, and 5 or 6 years in, we look to attract some expertise to help us further grow the business, and welcomed Kevin Appleton as our first non-executive director at that point in time, and yeah, with Kevin's assistance, we've spent certainly a lot of the last 3 years forming not only a plan to further grow the business, but recruiting a team to go on and deliver that plan in the future. So I think the only other thing to add that's important, and this feeds into why we've chosen an EOT to transition into, sits around the culture of the business. So I've been very fortunate to work for 2 organisations before founding Horizon Platforms that had a superb culture, very team focused. So great environments to work within, but not only that, the team shared a great sense of pride in what they were looking to achieve, and that was largely around serving customers to a great standard. So that's very much in my DNA. That was my apprenticeship really in business, and so that's very much what Horizon's been founded upon, a very team first focus. So
okay, thanks for that. That's an intriguing mix of rehire and your own hire business. We'll talk about that later on. But we're here now talking about the shift to the employee trust. Can you explain what it is and why you're doing it?
Yeah, do you want me to jump in on that?
By all means.
So if we split the answer to that, maybe, Murray, into 2 parts, one of which is sort of why we ended up with that as a solution, and then Ben can develop the what that really is as a solution. But certainly since I got involved with the business and had first conversations with Ben and with Rory, who's the other majority shareholder, became a shareholder in the business myself, the discussions that we had at the beginning were, how do we avoid this kind of the kind of slightly corrosive cycle really of start a business, build a business really quickly, sell a business, and that's not to kind of cast judgment on anybody else, and I've been the beneficiary on the other side of buying quite a few of those sort of businesses, so it's not to say that there's no role for that, but I think we all individually and collectively felt that actually having a business that's got a much longer term aspiration and is prepared to be a bit patient about what it does and why it's doing it, and just do the things that you think are going to put it in the best position, not just for kind of the next 6 months, but for the next 6 years, and maybe even, without being too ambitious, the next decade or two. There was something kind of really attractive about that. And but as we went on, and particularly again for the two majority owners in the form of Ben and Rory, who are both guys at a different stage of life to me, you get this, which is what happens. You get this really uncomfortable tension between, yes, we want to have stability of ownership on the one hand, but also actually, all of our life savings are tied up in this business, and kind of very genuinely, how do you end up sort of benefiting from running a business financially? I don't mean excessively financially, but how do you even sort of get to make sort of freer decisions about where your kids go to school or something, without giving up the ownership of your business in a way that is potentially unhelpful and maybe even damaging for its longer term future? And so you got this tension between, you want stability on the one hand, but you want a bit of liquidity for the owners on the other hand. And the way, of course, that most people end up dealing with that is that they just forget the stability thing. I mean, they surrender the stability thing by saying, well, actually, we'll just turn that into liquidity, and we'll pass the ownership of the business to a trade buyer, or a private equity or some other private buyer, or in very rare circumstances for larger businesses, we'll float it on the stock exchange. And the truth is, as soon as you've basically let the liquidity side of that argument win, you've lost control of the culture of the business, and you've lost control of the ability to focus on a longer term strategy for the business. But we explored all of those, and I think we explored all of those, Ben, it's fair to say, very openly and honestly, and said, what are the pros and cons of each of those? And then, as we went further and further into it, and encountered this structure called the Employee Ownership Trust, the more attractive that became. Ben will go into the particular details of that later, but the essential principles of it are that you have the value of your business independently assessed, just as you would if you're kind of going into an arm's length sale process with somebody else. But then effectively you create an independent employee ownership trust, and you transfer some or all, in our case, all of your shares to that employee ownership trust in return for a payment. Now that payment isn't instant. I mean, because what then happens is that the business effectively loans the money or gives the money to the employee ownership trust to settle the debt with the vendors. But no businesses, or very, very few businesses, have enough cash in them on day one to be able to settle that debt on day one, the full sale debt. So the way that kind of then works out is that the employee ownership trust establishes a long-term debt with the vendors, and that's paid out to the vendors. The routing is company pays trust pays vendors over a number of years. The advantage that it brings is that it attracts a 0% tax rate. So because the obvious question would be, well, why don't you guys just hold on to the business and continue to draw money in dividends? And the answer to that is, I think that personally, I feel that the government, the tax advisors of the government have dropped a bit of a lemon on that, because they incentivize entrepreneurs to sell their businesses with a kind of very low entrepreneur tax relief, low entrepreneur tax relief on sale to a trade buyer or to a private equity buyer. But effectively, if you're just rewarding yourself, or if a substantial part of your reward is through dividends, to all intents and purposes, that's attracting normal income tax rate. So there's this sort of perverse incentive out there in the marketplace for entrepreneurs that might want to run their business and they might want to stay with it for the longer term, to sell it, because every time that they're kind of paying themselves out through dividends, they're paying a 40-odd% tax rate on that, which is clearly very, very inefficient. So the attraction of ending up with the EOT was great, because Ben will explain the particular structure in a minute, but it's effectively you're ceding control of the business to an ownership trust that represents the employees and that represents employees and owners, other owners. They're paying back the kind of the sale price of the business out of cash flow over a number of years, but that's a tax advantage cash flow, so it's a slower it's a slower return to shareholders, but it's a more tax efficient return to shareholders. But you're doing all of that so that on the other side of it, it doesn't feel a great deal different from an ownership and culture point of view than it did when you went into it. And that's the only structure really available where you can kind of guarantee that. So we end up on the other side of it as a business, a bit like John Lewis or Richer Sounds, that's owned through a trust on behalf of its employees. The shareholders are effectively, the original shareholders are effectively paid out over a number of years, but it absolutely kind of ring fences the culture and future focus of the business, rather than just ceding control of that to a third party who, you know, no matter how attractive they may look on day one, and may I say that I looked particularly attractive when I was buying businesses, both financially and physically, I like to think, but even no matter how attractive they look, you can't guarantee that the person that you sold to is going to be around in a year or two's time. You can't assume that business is going to be the same in a year or two's time. So you are just taking a bet, basically. So that's a long explanation, but I think, Ben, is that a fair description of how and why we got to where we got to?
It is, yeah. I mean, just to add, we did an awful lot of research. So we're now members of the Employee Ownership Association. They were kind enough to connect us with a number of people who had already sold their businesses to an employee ownership trust. So it was great to have conversations with people who've been there and done that, and just learn more about this as an ownership structure. As Kevin touched on there, the government provide incentives for people like us to consider this structure. Why is that? Well, evidence suggests that businesses that are employee owned grow quicker than those they compete against. They tend to be more productive, and of course, the government is on and has been on for quite some time a big productivity drive, and they tend to ride through economic turbulence better than companies owned in a more traditional way. So,
and is that because there's an implied greater incentive for the employees?
I will be able to answer that question better in I would say 12 months' time. But yeah, I would very much assume so. And another interesting observation that we made whilst carrying out this research is that there are 600, give or take, employee-owned businesses here in the UK. Not a single one has been sold on again, which, if you think about what Kevin was saying around stability, the importance of stability for those who work within an organisation, when you've got the decision as to whether to accept an offer to sell a business being made by those within the team, and again you think about what Kevin referred to as the disruption that can be caused by transfer of ownership. Then it's not difficult to understand why not a single one of the 600 has been sold. But this all very much fits with our culture as a business now, and as we want to retain that same culture going forward, and very much fits with our plan to grow the business in the future as well.
So where does
Ben? Sorry, Mario. I was just going to add to that. I think the other reason, just a sort of a financial reason why employee-owned businesses tend to be more resilient is that because the game isn't sort of load yourself up with debt to kind of create a a slightly sort of debt-fueled artificial growth trajectory for 4 or 5 years and then sell yourself. Probably the balance sheets of employee-owned businesses, I would guess, but I'd guess on the basis of some knowledge, the balance sheets of employee-owned businesses will be rather less stressed the balance sheets of businesses owned by trade or on the stock market or particularly private equity. So you're tending to take a view that is about, on anything that's about guaranteeing the long-term performance of the business, and so you can afford for your bets to be more selective and more in areas that are going to produce genuine strategic gain rather than just kind of puff the top line for a few years and not be sustainable.
I suppose that one of the key issues is the independent value assessment of the business. In a sense, you're excluding the possibility of an auction for the company, which might maximize the value. But so you sacrifice a potential gain there in retaining the culture, which is what you want to do.
Yeah, very much so. So we had the business independently valued. That valuation was reported to HMRC as part of the clearance that you have to go through as part of putting together an employee ownership trust. And yeah, the valuation report did carry out comparisons to recent trade sales in this industry, and so we're not achieving the multiples that others have. Because they've obviously run the process and have the benefit of creating that potential auction.
Yeah.
But this is a very long-term decision. Speaking very personally, I suppose, adding to what Kevin said around the reason this is an EOT. I see a long-term future within Horizon platforms personally, and I know I speak for my business partner Rory when I say that. So this is about unlocking some of the value in our shareholding, but doing it in a really structured, we believe well thought out, sensible way that's sympathetic to not only the team within the business, but the customers we serve, the suppliers we partner with.
Yeah. Where does the power lie? So you have a board structure, but it's a trust board, and who sits on that board?
So our board will be made up of 5 people. So I will sit on that board, as will Rory Duggan, my business partner. But then there will be an independent director, so somebody who sits away from the day-to-day running of the business, and there will be 2 trustee directors that come from within the team, and we're actually going through an election process as we speak. So people within the team are putting themselves forward to be elected by the team onto that board, and so yeah, the team of 5 trustee directors is important because there's myself and Rory, to a degree, considering that we're funding this deal, are slightly conflicted. So therefore, the control has to be with the team. That's an important part of the structure.
And
also, sorry, Murray, just to avoid the kind of the wrong impression landing as well, it's important to remember that the trust board performs the kind of function that sort of an AGM would for in a shareholder environment. So the trust board doesn't run the company week by week. The traditional board of directors does that, but the board of directors reports to and is accountable to the trust board in the same way that it would report to an AGM of shareholders or something in a more conventional ownership structure.
Yeah. And does every employee have a right to vote in this election for the 2 representatives, or is it a different structure?
No, everybody within the team, save for myself and Rory. We won't be voting, but yeah, the wider team will get an opportunity to vote for those who are putting themselves forward. Okay,
and then so I guess in 10 years' time, or however long, when you've been paid off in that sense and the structure, then you're effectively managers on behalf of the trust, as long as the trust wants you to stick around. I mean, that's the way it works, is it?
It is. But what an employee ownership trust structure allows you to do is to still remain competitive as an employer, so appropriately reward, and so therefore you can attract and retain talent. And so what? So the 100% of the existing shareholding will be sold to the trust later this month. But then plus or minus 30% of the shares will be set aside and distributed as growth shares to the leadership team with varying different hurdle rates. And so I will be acquiring some of those growth shares, but the hurdle rate written on my share certificate will be the same number that the company's been sold for. So yes, in 10 years' time, I will be a manager within the business, but I'll be incentivized to ensure the business carries on growing because I have an opportunity to liquidate some shares at some point in the future.
Yeah. Okay. When did you engage your employees in this discussion, and what was the reaction?
So we announced to the team early last week, the wider team, the management team, the week before that, and because we didn't want to be in a position where we're telling them that they just bought the company. That just didn't feel right and proper. And plus, also, we were keen to run this election process and form the trustee board before we actually complete. In terms of the reaction, without doubt, I think some of our colleagues were shocked. Didn't expect this to be on our agenda. But once the shock factor subsided, and they got, we gave them all the answers to all their questions. There's excitement building. It's for our younger colleagues who see an opportunity to develop their careers within the organisation. Once the mortgage, as we're calling it, the vendor loan, is paid down, then the profits will be distributed equally amongst the team, and there could be exciting sums of money, and an additional incentive that the government currently offer is that up to £3,400 of that profit distribution it can be received by each employee once a year tax-free. Mm-hmm. So yeah, further incentives to support businesses like ours transition through to employee ownership.
We all know that things change and circumstances change, and suddenly you've got this massive acquiring company desperately trying to buy companies. I mean, is there anything to prevent the sale of Horizon in the foreseeable future? Does the trust prevent that, or how does that work?
There's nothing to prevent that. It will be down to the trustee as to whether that was an appropriate thing to do for the. Yeah. But they would be their first thought will always be, is this good for the beneficiaries? Is this good for the team within Horizon? Yeah. And so hence we think that event's highly unlikely, but never say never.
I want to get onto your plans for the business, but before I do that, it sounds interesting that you're the first equipment rental company in the UK to go through this trust route. Is that surprising, do you think, especially given the tax benefits for the owners? Is it surprising that nobody else has done it?
So this structure has only been around since 2014, so it's still relatively new, and the volume of transactions have really started to only pick up over the last 2 or 3 years. So, being honest, Murray, I'd never heard of this structure until 9-10 months ago. So I don't believe it's well publicised. It's been an interesting few days having conversations prior to the press release with friends and partners that we trade with throughout the industry, and I sense they were the same as me 9-10 months ago. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if any other people pick up on this and pursue it as a potential means of doing what we're aiming to do.
I'd also say just to add to that, Murray, and sparing Ben and Rory's blushes, in my experience, they're pretty unusual entrepreneurs in the sense that, one of the things that characterises entrepreneurs is that, is that there's a high level of kind of personal financial drive, and that's clearly not absent. But I think they've also, throughout the time that I've known them, they've always been able to keep that in what I would describe as a very healthy balance. Their own personal financial drive with trying to do kind of the right thing by the people that work with them and customers as well. And I think this is just a natural outworking of that. But I suspect that that's why they're quite rare, because when a huge check payable tomorrow is dangled in front of somebody, you need a certain degree of resolve to say, actually, that I'm happy to get that check actually spread over 8 years or whatever, but still have the kind of the culture that and joy and motivation and so on that exists in the company without putting that at risk. So I think that it's more than just the technical reasons why they're not widely in evidence. It just needs a very particular cocktail of personality and motivation and financial hunger, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Well, look, good luck with the trust, but let's chat a bit about the business itself. So you operate from one depot, so you've resisted the temptation to branch out into multiple locations, and also a very large percentage of your business is through partnerships with other independent rental companies. Has that just evolved, or was it always part of your strategy?
We've always presented ourselves as a national supplier, and then supported out of area contracts with cross hire. If you think about what I said earlier around our target market being those customers who appreciate service over price, there are a number of contractors that operate nationally that very much appreciate the service element of powered access supply and are willing to pay for that reliable, responsive service. So running alongside that, I've always been very, very passionate about the potential that lies within typically independently owned regional suppliers and the great service that they can supply. It was one of the reasons we were instrumental to the Access Alliance being founded over 10 years ago now. But I don't think anyone's yet managed to harness that exceptional service and take it to market as a viable alternative to one of the national suppliers. And that's the space that we're looking to inhabit, and doing so, offering that access to those high quality regional independents on a multi-channel basis, so allowing customers to trade online as well as through traditional methods.
So for a large national contractor working with you, even though they're renting from many independents through you, do they feel as if they're dealing with one company? I mean, is that how you structure it, or do they know they're working with 5, 10, however many separate businesses?
Yeah, I mean, we're completely transparent with the customers we serve. We don't try and disguise who we are and how we operate. But we're clear to point out that we'll stand behind the service. It's for us to work with our supply partners, and this is why being an own equipment provider is a critical part of our plan, because that enables us to benchmark ourselves against them against us, share best practice, and so with working shoulder to shoulder with our supply chain network, continually aim to raise standards of service and improve that customer experience on an ongoing basis.
And I suppose that model means that there's less of a focus on endlessly expanding the size of the fleet or adding new locations? Because for you, partnerships and new partnerships with independents are just as important as investment in your own fleet.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, our aim is to grow together with our partners. Yeah.
I was going to just add to that as well. If I go back to sort of my own days involved with large national rental providers in the UK and elsewhere, particularly for that slice of the customer base where they're performing a task which is very super time critical, super service critical, being on and off site within very, very tight time windows was really important, and kind of equivalently high standards of service across the country were sort of super critical. That in an environment where the people that are working for you are employees, no matter how strong your systems are, providing a national service to those kinds of customers, you're always as strong in a sense as your weakest depot. And I always felt in those days that, I mean, that was the part of the market that was always most strongly under attack from regional independents. And actually, the only way of selling against that was to sell you can go to regional independents, but just think about the ordering complexity, the admin complexity, the who ultimately owns, takes responsibility for this, where's the accountability, difference in standards of certification and quality processes and so on. And actually, the proposition that Ben and the team, have been developing over the last couple of years, and where there's a substantial. I mean, the business spends now as much, if not more, on technology as it spends on equipment. So the amount of investment that's gone into making that an absolutely seamless journey. And if you went to visit the site. The site in Yorkshire, I'd encourage you to do that actually, Murray, because it is really impressive. What you'd see really is, yes, there's a part traditional access depot there, but there's probably even more of it that looks like a kind of a sort of a national administration centre. I hesitate to use the word administration because that has sort of some negative content, but just the ownership of the interaction with the customer. So whether somebody's hiring in Cornwall or in Cumbria or in Kent or Kirkcaldy, it's the same voice, it's the same service, it's the same systems, it's the same presentation of invoices and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And then that becomes like a really, really tough proposition to fight against for the nationals. So I think that's the space, Ben, that we've increasingly found ourselves inhabiting, and over the last year, even within the world of lockdowns and coronavirus, I mean, the business has grown over the last 12 months, and I would say that is that's testament to the kind of the power of that offer as it gets more and more traction, and as the technology that sits behind it supports it ever more strongly. It's not just technology; it's great. It's people that are really, really switched on as well and understand the importance of managing process just as well and arguably better than you can manage metal.
Yeah, spending as much on IT or on technology as you are on equipment, that's a fantastic fact. And growing during 2020, that seems remarkable. Maybe Ben, you can explain how, just a little bit of information on how you've managed that and what you think the prospects are for this year.
Yeah, it's fair to say COVID was a significant disruption to the execution of our growth plan. We would have posted some much better results had we not had the dip in April and May. But yeah, as our target customers got back to work through June last year, our growth plan kicked back in again. As Kevin said, as I said earlier, what we're offering now, and that level of service, leveraging the quality and the regional independence, is very much appreciated. But in terms of growth, we've been very, very targeted at the sectors that we're investing sales and marketing effort to speak to and to attract from within, they're tried and tested methods of marketing and sales, but we're doing it with a very determined, very focused approach, and yeah, as Kevin says, it's bearing fruit.
And the target sectors are?
So we're fine-tuning what we've been doing for some time, but certainly logistics and warehousing, facilities maintenance, and targeting those sectors that are remaining busy despite the pandemic. Yeah.
Okay. Kevin, I should have asked earlier, what's your role ongoing? You've been the chairman for 6 years. Under the new structure, do you still have an active role?
Yeah, I'll be staying with the business until well, in my case, in 8 years, probably the only thing that will be getting liquidated is my food. But no, I'm staying with the business, so I continue to be a loan provider to the business, and will continue to serve on the board there and provide what I laughingly refer to as help and advice for as long as they can tolerate me, basically.
Okay, good. That's good to hear. Kevin and Ben, we've been chatting for about 35 minutes. I think that's probably enough. You've really been very helpful and clear in your explanation. It sounds like a really interesting journey you're on. So good luck, and thanks very much to both of you.
Thanks, Murray.
Thanks, Murray. Yeah, good to speak to you.
And you.
Cheers for now, guys.